Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and this is going to be a bit of a different one. I thought we'd try something new where I just basically pick a few little comments that have appeared on the videos, just a handful, just 5 or 6, and discuss them in a way that, you know, isn't going to be in as much detail as a full video, but things that it might be quite nice to just add something in there as well. We'll see how it goes. Let me know how you think it is in the comments below, and we could make this a weekly thing. So in this video, the topics that have come up are basically discussing increased output for the channel, so something a bit personal to the channel. But then there were some comments about lowering food health safety standards in the UK, UK car manufacturing post-Brexit with tariffs in the event of a no deal particularly, making Nigel Farage ambassador to the US, and populations accepting ill treatment of marginalised groups. So let's kick off with one. So I was talking about increasing output for the channel, and someone was saying careful with the work-life balance there. What I wasn't talking about was just increasing my output on top of everything else. So the plan at the moment is to go full-time with the channel from the 1st of December, no, the 1st of January, get it right, 2020, so the end of this year. And that's what I'm talking about there. Now, at the moment, I'm on the summer holidays. I've got work to do as well, but I'm going to be increasing output as we go through the summer as well, just to try things out there. So I wasn't talking about on top of work, then adding in more videos as well. This is purely about shifting the channel from a lower priority, basically a main hobby, to main source of income, quite frankly. Then there was a bit of response here. Now, what I'd like to focus on this bit, because this is interesting, because a few other people have pointed this out, about my analysis. And the phrase used here was, your analysis is forensic. And I think that is literally true, because other people have asked me, is the way you analyze, you conduct your political analysis because you have a science background? And I think it probably is, because most political commentators have like a political background, not necessarily as a politician, but they may have studied politics at university or sociology. That, in other words, they've studied humanities as opposed to taking a science route. And there's a different way of analysing situations as a scientist. And I think possibly it is because people have gone down the humanities route. They'll observe a behaviour and they'll try and come up with some rationale for it. Can we believe what this person's saying? Very important with politicians. Or is there some other explanation for their behaviour beyond what they're saying it is? Whereas with a scientist, what you do is you get all your available data and you try and construct a model. So what I would do in a situation with political analysis is try and look at what various people are doing and saying and fit it into a model where it all works. Because a lot of the time you'll find out that, this is consistent with that, but that it's not consistent with that. And you're trying to work out all the possible outcomes until you get a model that fits. And it doesn't mean to say that that is then correct. It just means that at the moment it fits. And then if you get some new information, well, you'll change your model to make it fit again if that new information stops it working. So yeah, it is possible that the way I analyse things is because of my scientific background. But anyway, on to the sort of non-channely ones. So there was a comment here saying EU prohibits chlorinated chicken and hormone-injected beef due to health and safety reasons. Johnson will remove this regulation, allow tons of cheap American meat. The US insist on labelling of that not being mandatory, so you cannot know if your meat comes from US and was chlorinated. So this is and there's a few things around this. So first of all, and as this becomes more of a reality, in other words, if we ever do move to a position where our government tries to allow this, they will, of course, as has already happened, try and muddy the water by making out that the issue about chlorination is a political issue. Well, I mean, the EU chlorinates salad. I mean, it can't be that harmful. And this is where the problem comes. The chlorination itself is not harmful. We know it's not harmful. When you go to the local swimming baths, the water is chlorinated, you're swimming around in it. It's not the chlorination that's the issue. The issue is that because of chlorination, standards tend to be lower in the abattoirs in a particular chicken processing plants in America, because they think, well, we're going to chlorinate at the end anyway, that'll sort out the bacteria. But it doesn't. So they cut corners earlier on in the process thinking that the chlorination is like a magic bullet. And as a result of that, you do have salmonella deaths in the United States, where you don't in this country. In fact, it's not just salmonella that's the issue with chicken, Campylobacter as well. And you do get instances of that in this country, but it hasn't actually, if you look at the number of deaths caused by poor food hygiene in terms of the processing plants, then even given that America has a much larger population, the rate of death is much greater than it is in the UK, and that is the problem with that. But they will attempt to muddy the waters. Now, in terms of Johnson just removing the regulation, well, he can't. Remember, these things can only be removed by Parliament, and we're in a situation at the moment, and this may continue for the foreseeable future. You would think this will definitely continue until Brexit is sorted out one way or the other, that no party has a majority. And when no party has an overall majority in the Commons, that means no Prime Minister really has that much control. And in a situation like this, it is spectacularly unlikely that the Prime Minister would ever be able to change that law. So in terms of allowing those food standards to drop to the point where we'd have to accept that, spectacularly unlikely even after Brexit, unless the Conservatives ever found themselves with a significant majority. And it may have to be a significant majority, because you've got to bear in mind, this isn't something that even Conservatives would be in favour of. This is specifically those who, you know, the disaster capitalists who just want to sell off the country for their own personal profit. As for the labelling, yeah, I noticed that. You know, when I've been in America, it's like it's very, very different. I haven't been to America for some time, but when you are, it's really weird. You look at the label, and it's like, I have no idea what's in this. You're not telling me. Whereas in this country, of course, you do. So that is a very odd thing as well. The fact, you know, and they make a big thing of it. You can track the source of your meat to where it came from, like from farm to table in this country. Yeah, if that's not so much in America, then that is going to be a problem, because that's going to be the issue, not even knowing. Because you could well put, you know, if even if this chlorinated chicken is allowed in this country, if there's a regulation that says, but it has to be clearly labelled as such, in much the same way as GM food and things like that have to be, then some people may look at it and go, okay, maybe not. A lot of people, I fear, would still anyway, just because of cost. People can't afford. There's so many people in poverty, they can't afford to be choosy. They will take something that has a small, no one's saying that, you know, you're dicing with death by eating this stuff. Even in America, the number of people who die compared to the people who are eating this stuff is very small, but it's just that there are some. But it may be enough to put some people off. But if there isn't even a regulation that say it has to be labelled as such, you wouldn't even know, would you? You will just, in fact, you may just eschew cheap meat altogether, and then you might get a bit of double bluff going on in shops where they artificially raise the price to make it seem like it's not the really cheap chlorinated stuff. And then you pay an extra for this Russian roulette. Next one. So it says, hello from Ireland. Hello. It says, you mentioned Britain selling cars to Australia and getting the parts from Europe to make those cars. These parts, you'll say, will be subject to tariffs on entering the UK, and that will make the cars more expensive. You have to tell me why you believe that the UK would put tariffs on parts that would make its own exports less competitive. Is that just a guess that fits in with the viewpoint of promoting or due information that such tariffs will be imposed? Partly both, because the government has sort of given out its strategy. The issue, of course, and they may not, anything could change from now and then. They may decide that they wouldn't put tariffs on the imports of those things. In reality, what the government is already talking about is completely abandoning the UK car manufacturing industry. That is their current plan. That is what their chief economic advisor told them to do, and that's the position they're adopting. The issue is, of course, we have British manufacturers who manufacture car parts, and if you reduce imports from the European ones to zero, then you completely screw over those British manufacturers. And at that point, you are basically killing off the UK car manufacturing industry, because at the end of the day, although Australia, yes, we've agreed a deal where they'll still be able to buy our vehicles. Well, they have the same deal with the EU. Why wouldn't they just buy them from the EU? Because the other thing is, in the EU itself, because it does go back and forth. Like, we've got car manufacturing plants in the UK that gets its parts from other countries in the EU. There are car manufacturing plants in the rest of the EU that get their parts from plants in the UK. It's all, you know, moves around a lot. But in the EU, as in the rest of the EU, we're still the EU, thank you very much. But in the rest of the EU, they have already been saying to those car manufacturing plants, you probably should be sourcing your stuff from non-UK sources, because the problem is, from the EU point of view, in the event of a no-deal Brexit, if they're making cars with parts that have been sourced from the UK, then it's not even just to do with the tariffs. That you can't claim that car's been produced in the EU, because if a certain amount of it was actually produced in the UK, that comes into regulatory difficulties in terms of trade. So may not be an issue for them trading with Australia, because Australia are fine either way because of this deal. I hope that's what it means anyway. But with other countries, so we're likely to see a situation where the EU isn't going to want to source any materials from the UK. That stuff's over businesses in the UK. In return, if the government also stuff over those businesses by reducing those tariffs to zero, then you are just basically saying, which they sort of already have, but you are just coming straight out of it and saying there isn't going to be any car manufacturing in the UK. So it's sort of based on a little bit of both, because although Theresa May's government has set out a general strategy on tariffs, that could all change with Boris Johnson, naturally. Assuming he even understands what a strategy is. Next one. So, the Nigel Farage as ambassador. So, obviously what has happened is that our ambassador to the US has basically had to resign because Boris Johnson wouldn't back him. But ultimately what started it all off was leaked memos that he wrote as part of his job, which were not very complimentary about Trump's administration or the way it was run, shall we say. And it was leaked to a Brexiteer journalist. And the questions at the time were, what does a Brexiteer have to gain from this? And the Brexit isn't just about breaking from the EU. It's about, remember, it is a right-wing plan to basically sell off our country. Conservatives have already been doing that at a rate of knots for quite some time. But the EU makes certain aspects of it more difficult. And what Donald Trump wants is he wants an ambassador that's a business person. He doesn't want a diplomat. He wants a businessman. Because he doesn't understand what an ambassador is. And there is a strong belief that if Theresa May does not appoint an ambassador from the Foreign Office before next week, she's now only got basically a week to do it, then Boris Johnson will make the appointment that Donald Trump wants. Now, Nigel Farage has said he doesn't want to be ambassador, but he agrees it should be someone like him. And someone who's a Brexit supporter, someone who's very positive about Donald Trump, and someone who's a businessman, not a diplomat, not a career diplomat. Now, this would be both bad and good. Let us imagine it was Nigel Farage. It would be both bad and good. It would be bad in the sense that an ambassador is supposed to be there to present the UK's position to the US administration, but also to report back to the UK on what the US is up to. Give us information. It's not really spying as such, but because you're doing it, you're getting publicly available information and from meetings and things like that. But you are reporting back on, how you think things are going, what sort of policy plans the UK government may have that might cause friction with that government, the US government in this case, which ones might find favour and so on. So the bad thing with Nigel Farage doing that, who is basically a Trump toady, is he would not present the UK's position. We need the ambassador to be able to present our position. He won't. If the UK government said to Ambassador Farage, right, we're looking at this policy, we think it might cause a bit of friction, what do you think? He would go straight to Donald Trump and tell them what we're planning. Screwing the whole thing over. We wouldn't even be able to trust our own ambassador with confidential information, is what I'm saying. So it'd be hideously bad from that point of view. However, from another point of view, Donald Trump wants to make this appointment because he thinks that somehow the ambassador has a role in any trade agreement that might emerge. And they don't really. They wouldn't be involved in the negotiations. They would only be presented. They'd just be a go-between. Just be presenting the UK's position and reporting back on the US's position. They wouldn't be one of the team of trade negotiators. They wouldn't get to decide anything anyway. The ambassador is a diplomat, regardless of whether you get a trained, experienced diplomat in the role or not. They are a diplomat. They have no political power. They have no power to yay or nay any trade agreements or any policy decisions. The government do that. So, from that point of view, it's not actually a disaster to put Nigel Farage in. It wouldn't change at all the trade agreement we end up getting. at all in any sense. And actually, there could be a slight advantage in that it would at least get Nigel Farage out of Europe. I mean, he did threaten to leave Britain if Brexit went tits up. Well, it's gone tits up and he still hasn't left us. It would be nice for him to make good on that promise and actually bugger off out of Europe altogether, not just the UK. And having him go and hide in Washington, where he can do no harm to us other than, I say, we won't be able to have normalised diplomatic relationships with the US because our government will not be able to tell our ambassador confidential things. They won't be able to trust him. But as I've said before, at the moment, the diplomatic situation with the US is very difficult anyway because of Donald Trump being there. So whilst ever Donald Trump is there, you could argue there isn't a lot of mileage in, you know, close diplomatic relationships at the moment, unfortunately anyway. So that's my view on that one. And then the final one, so I was obviously talking about the migrant camps, or the concentration camps, is what really are, in America yesterday. And someone did put in a comment, and I will have to say this, you know, this isn't just like picking on America for this. This is a particularly bad one. You know, there's various countries that have done these things. I mean, I don't just mean historically. I mean, like right now, there was Sangatte, of course, you know, UK and French in terms of migrants trying to cross the Calais border into the UK. That wasn't great either. I mean, there is a distinction to be made between, as well, economic migrants, where, of course, a nation has absolutely the right to decide whether they let you in or not, and asylum seekers, where we've all got an international duty of care. But yeah, I mean, there's been all sorts of situations with European countries in order to try and prevent, migration has put people's lives in danger, shall we say. So we're not clean on this one. But just because we're not clean on it doesn't mean to say we shouldn't call it out where we see it elsewhere as well. And there's one person saying here, so the camps are my worst fears that my parents had in the 90s come true. Even though I was born in the States, I never felt safe because some of my family was undocumented. They have since both obtained citizenship and are now safe. Well, I hope so. I'm genuinely afraid for the family that never did, and I hope they stay safe with the raids going on in New York and other major cities. I hope this pushes people here in the US into doing something. The status quo here is doing nothing, and as the US slips further and further right with no real pushback, the more my paranoia grows. I think it's the same in the UK as well, and this is why we're drawing all these parallels with 1920s through 30s Germany, because it's the same. It's starting in the same way. It's the same methods being used. It's ramping up in the same way. And people keep saying, well, we could, it's almost like people won't believe it'll eventually happen because it already is. Just based on the fact, well, at some point, everyone will recognise it for what it is. But they're not doing. Because when it comes down to it, people don't really understand what happened in the 1920s and 30s unless they lived through it. Most people are not really students of history. They don't really read about these things. They just get it from films or something, dramatisations, which don't give the full picture or the full horror of it. They think they know what happened without actually knowing what happened, and so it will, and they'll move very, very slowly, very little by little. You just nudge little by little, and it works incredibly. You do something that people don't really accept, but then you keep doing it until it's normalised, and then all of a sudden it's normal, and then you just push the boundary a little bit more until that's normalised, and you just keep doing it in a very deliberate action. Brexit is the culmination, for example, of 20 years of this nudging. 20 years. And, with these key players just nudging and nudging and nudging, normalising things which should never have been normalised, never have been allowed to be normalised. And so, yeah, I imagine the fact that there isn't... I would like to think what happened in the US, literally as it happened in the UK, there would be the most immense protests. But, we're doing things that are also unconscionable, and we're not having these mass protests, because if you keep it out of the public knowledge, out of the public eye, and where it creeps into the public eye, you muddy the waters by saying, oh no, they're just exaggerating it, it's not really like that, then people aren't going to become outraged by it. And I think that's what's happening in the US. And I think there's a serious danger that's what's happening in the UK as well. So anyway, some little comments there that weren't really worth going into massive amounts of detail. Hope you found it interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe for further content. And let me know what you think in the comments below. And until next time, I'll see you later.